The Mexican Grand Prix delivered one of the most controversial moments of the 2025 Formula One season, and Max Verstappen's response to the situation has sent shockwaves through the racing community. With just 2 laps remaining in the race, the FIA deployed a virtual safety car that completely neutralized Verstappen's charge for second place. And what the Red Bull driver said afterward has everyone talking about timing, luck, and the fine margins that define championship battles. Verstappen was closing in on Charles Leclerc for second place in the closing stages of the Mexican Grand Prix, and the gap between the two drivers was shrinking with every passing corner. The Red Bull driver had been steadily closing the gap to Leclerc and was preparing to make an attack for second place, positioning himself perfectly for what looked like an inevitable overtaking attempt. Then came the moment that changed everything. Carlos Sainz Williams came to a standstill on the circuit, which required the race officials to deploy a virtual safety car to allow the marshals to safely clear the stricken car from the track. The VSC meant that all drivers had to slow down and maintain their gaps, which effectively ended Verstappen's pursuit of the Ferrari. At that point, Verstappen had been steadily closing the gap to Leclerc and was preparing to make an attack for second place. But the intervention came at the worst possible moment for the Red Bull driver's championship ambitions. The VSC was lifted with just half a lap remaining, which in theory gave Verstappen a chance to have one final go at Leclerc. But in practice, there simply wasn't enough time or track left to make a meaningful attempt at overtaking. When Verstappen was asked about the situation after the race, his response was remarkably calm yet loaded with meaning. He said, "You win some, you lose some, right?" This statement showed that he understood that these kinds of situations are just part of racing, and that sometimes the timing of safety interventions works in your favor and sometimes it doesn't. It was a mature response from a driver who has been in Formula One long enough to know that getting frustrated about things outside of your control doesn't help anyone. And it showed a level of perspective that comes from having won multiple championships and understanding that one position in one race isn't worth getting too worked up about. The context of Verstappen's weekend makes his third-place finish look even better than it might appear at first glance, because this was not an easy race for the Red Bull driver by any means. He had qualified in 5th place after struggling with the car all weekend, and he had described the Red Bull as just not working during qualifying and said it felt undrivable at times. Starting from 5th on the grid at a track where overtaking can be difficult meant that Verstappen knew he would have his work cut out for him if he wanted to finish on the podium. And the fact that he managed to gain 2 positions and finish 3rd shows that he drove a strong race despite the car's limitations. The opening lap of the race was particularly chaotic for Verstappen, and he talked about how hectic it was trying to survive the first few corners without getting caught up in any incidents. He mentioned that he got onto the curb on the outside of one of the corners and almost crashed onto the grass, which would have been a disaster for his race and potentially ended his chances of scoring good points. The fact that he managed to avoid any major problems during that first lap and then work his way forward through the field shows good racecraft and awareness, especially given that there were several incidents and penalties being handed out to other drivers during the opening stages of the race. Verstappen's battle with Lewis Hamilton was one of the key moments of his race, and while Hamilton ended up receiving a penalty for their interaction, Verstappen managed to come through that situation without any damage to his car or his race. The incidents at Turn 1 and Turn 3 during their battle were investigated by the stewards, but Verstappen was given no further action on both occasions, which meant he could continue pushing forward without having to worry about serving a penalty later in the race. These kinds of hard racing moments are what make Formula One exciting to watch, and Verstappen's ability to race aggressively while staying just on the right side of the regulations is part of what makes him such a successful driver. When Verstappen reflected on his race after crossing the finish line, he emphasized that it had been about surviving the first stint and then trying to make progress from there. The fact that he described his main goal as surviving shows just how difficult the conditions were for him during those opening laps. And it highlights that this wasn't a straightforward race where he could just cruise to a good result. He had to work for every position he gained, and the fact that he was even in a position to fight for second place by the end of the race is a testament to how well he managed the situation. The virtual safety car that ended Verstappen's pursuit of Leclerc was deployed for a legitimate safety reason, because Sainz's car needed to be cleared from the track and the marshals needed to be able to do their job without cars racing past at full speed. The FIA has to prioritize safety in these situations, and while the timing was unfortunate for Verstappen, the deployment of the VSC was the right decision, even if it did affect the racing at the end. The timing of when the VSC ended meant there was theoretically still time for racing, but in practice, the gap between Leclerc and Verstappen was just large enough that Verstappen couldn't close it down in the limited time available. From a championship perspective, the difference between second and third place at the Mexican Grand Prix was 1 point, which in the context of a title fight could potentially matter, but isn't a huge swing in the standings. Verstappen is currently 36 points behind championship leader Lando Norris, with 4 races remaining, which means he needs to find an average of 9 points per race to catch up. 1 extra point from finishing second instead of third would have been nice, but it's not going to make or break his championship challenge. What matters more is that Red Bull needs to improve the performance of their car so that Verstappen can fight at the front more consistently, because relying on other drivers making mistakes or having bad luck isn't a sustainable strategy for winning championships. The bigger picture for Verstappen is that he actually had a pretty good race considering the circumstances, because he started 5th and finished 3rd, while dealing with a car that wasn't working as well as he would have liked. He gained 2 positions over the course of the race, avoided any major incidents or penalties, and scored solid points for the championship. His comment that fighting for P2 with everything that happened in the first few laps is a strong result shows that he understands this was a good recovery drive rather than a disappointing race, and that perspective is important for maintaining morale and momentum going into the final races of the season. Looking ahead to the remaining 4 races, Verstappen and Red Bull know that they need to find more performance from their car if they want to have a realistic chance of catching Norris in the championship. The VSC situation at the end of the Mexican Grand Prix was unfortunate, but it's not the reason why Verstappen is 36 points behind in the standings. The real issue is that the Red Bull hasn't been as competitive as it needs to be at certain tracks, and that's what the team needs to focus on fixing. Verstappen's mature response to the VSC situation shows that he's not getting distracted by things he can't control, and that mental approach will be important as the championship fight goes down to the wire. The Mexican Grand Prix showed both the good and the challenging aspects of Verstappen's current situation. On one hand, he's still capable of fighting for podiums even when his car isn't at its best, and he's handling the pressure of the championship battle with maturity and perspective that only comes from years of experience at the highest level of motorsport. On the other hand, he needs better luck with things like safety car timing, and he needs his team to give him a more competitive car if he wants to close the gap to Norris in the remaining races. The VSC at the end of the race was just one of those racing moments where the timing didn't work out in his favor, but Verstappen's philosophical response to it suggests that he's focused on the bigger picture rather than getting caught up in frustration about individual moments that didn't go his way. These are the kinds of situations where luck plays a role in racing, and on this occasion, the luck didn't fall in Verstappen's favor. The championship battle now heads into its final stretch, with Verstappen needing to overcome a significant points deficit, while hoping that Red Bull can provide him with the machinery necessary to challenge for victories, rather than simply fighting for podium positions and hoping for favorable circumstances to fall into place.